The story I'm about to share didn't happen to me, but to my father. He's only told it 3 times, yet it's etched into my memory, word for word. This is why I'll never go camping alone, especially not in remote areas. My father now has Alzheimer's and lives in a nursing home. But before he got sick, he asked me to share this story as a warning about the dangers lurking out there. It all happened in the summer of 1986, in Freetown Fall River State Forest, southeastern Massachusetts. My dad always loved the outdoors, and back then, there weren't the same distractions that keep us glued to screens indoors. People were more adventurous, and my father took pride in being one of them, even after the traumas of that night. At that time, the town he lived in was extremely small, with fewer than 100 residents. Although there were other villages nearby, it was rare for people to mix. On July 15th, 1985, my parents had planned a camping trip in that area. They usually like to vacation a bit farther from home, but money was tight, so they decided camping was better than nothing. A few days before their trip, though, my grandmother fell ill, and my mother had to take care of her. Not wanting my dad to miss out on a break before returning to work, she insisted he go ahead with the trip. It wasn't his first time camping alone, and they had everything ready, so he decided to go. He hiked for about 5 hours until he found the perfect spot to pitch his tent. It was relatively sheltered, and the ground was firm enough to secure the tent without too much effort. The hike to the campsite was demanding, so he was exhausted. With not much else to do, he decided to go to sleep early, planning to wake up at sunrise and make the most of the day. By 7 a.m. the next morning, he was up and ready to start a new day. Everything was perfect until 4 p.m. when it started to rain heavily. Unprepared for such weather, he quickly searched for shelter and found a crevice between 2 rocks. It wasn't very big, but it was enough to keep most of the rain off him. Upon closer inspection, he realized the crevice was the entrance to a cave, the perfect place to stay completely dry. What he saw inside left him utterly shocked. A giant circle was drawn in chalk on the ground, with 2 dead bodies in the center. He didn't need to get closer to see they were dead. The ground around them was sticky and covered in a red liquid. Blood. Panic set in, his mind racing. It was a man and a woman, probably a couple, dressed in sportswear. The woman had a circle drawn on her forehead. It was clear these people had been murdered recently in a horrifying scene. Whoever killed them was likely nearby. Too close. He couldn't run out and risk being discovered, but he also couldn't stay there much longer. Whoever did this might return. Over the years, he'd heard stories of satanic cults rumored to roam the area but had never believed them. Neighboring villages had countless tales of what really went on in that forest. Rituals and sacrifices. Many visitors had gone missing in that part of the country, but he always thought it was due to people's naivety, unprepared and unfamiliar with the area, taking unnecessary risks. Now, he wasn't so sure. What if they were being murdered? The rain outside had stopped, the perfect time to leave as quietly as possible. My father was about to exit the cave when he heard a noise behind him. Reflexively, he turned and saw 2 eyes staring at him from a corner of the cave. Someone was there. Someone had been there the whole time, watching him. How had he not seen them before? Probably because he was panicking from the terrifying sight in the cave. He saw the eyes, and a split second later, a wide, sinister smile appeared on the person's face. One of those macabre smiles that chills your blood. Instinct took over, and he ran. He wasn't worried about being seen anymore. He just wanted to get out of there, as fast as possible. He ran for a day and a half, stopping only briefly to catch his breath and drink some water. He wasn't extremely athletic, but in a situation of panic and terror, adrenaline does all the work for you. When he finally reached a neighboring village, he ran to the police and reported everything he had seen. He was shown more than 50 photos of missing people. Some were children. All had disappeared in that area. Some over 10 years ago, others just weeks earlier. He identified the man and woman he had seen. They weren't a couple, but siblings. They loved adventures and exploring the country. They had left home 6 months earlier in a van, and their parents hadn't heard from them in 3 weeks. The police never found their bodies, never found who did it, but over the years, people continued to disappear. For many years, my father became obsessed with it, closely following the news and gathering information on all the stories circulating. No matter how far-fetched they seemed, he had lived that horror firsthand. Eventually, consumed by what he had experienced, he couldn't handle the lack of answers and the police's inability to solve the case. Back then, resources were much more limited than they are today. My father begged my mother to move to another state. He never ventured alone into the woods again, and stopped keeping up with news from that part of the country. Years later, as his memory began to fade and the Alzheimer's took hold, the details of that horrific night never left him. Even in his moments of clarity, the fear was evident in his eyes. It became clear to me that sharing his story was more than just recounting an eerie tale. It was a way to honor his experience and heed his warning. Now, as I pass on his words, I hope they serve as a reminder to always be cautious of the unknown. My father's encounter in Freetown Fall River State Forest remains a chilling testament to the unseen dangers that can lurk in the most unexpected places. In fact, I've since discovered that satanic cults are far more prevalent across the country than most people realize. Camping had never been my thing. The thought of leaving the city, even for a weekend, was something I usually dreaded. The bugs, the lack of comfort, the solitude, it all seemed too much. But I had been feeling stuck, trapped in my comfort zone. I needed a change, something to shake up my routine. After some research, I stumbled upon several YouTube videos about solo camping. At first, it seemed like too much of a shock, but I convinced myself it was exactly what I needed. A big jolt to wake me up. It was only 2 nights after all. Little did I know the real shock I was in for. Living in Louisiana has its unique charms, especially for someone like me who enjoys delving into the mysterious and the macabre. One day, while I was searching for camping spots, I stumbled upon a story that instantly captured my attention. It was about Manchac Swamp, known as one of the most scenic destinations in Louisiana. However, beneath its picturesque exterior lies a chilling legend that strikes fear into the hearts of many. According to local tales, the ghost of a voodoo queen named Julia Brown haunts these wetlands. They say she felt unappreciated in her solitude and would often sit on her porch, ominously singing, "One day I'm going to die and take the whole town with me." The townspeople believed it was a curse, and not long after her death, a devastating hurricane swept through the area, wreaking havoc and seemingly fulfilling her dark prophecy. Intrigued and excited by this, I found myself unable to resist the allure of Manchac Swamp. Despite my general anxieties and social fears, horror stories have always been a source of fascination rather than fright. They were one of the few things I genuinely enjoyed exploring. So, I decided that the Manchac Swamp would be the perfect place to begin my adventure out of my comfort zone. I reached the edge of the swamp just after noon. I walked for about an hour, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety with each step. I spent a significant amount of time figuring out the best spot to set up my tent. I had wasted too much time researching the horror stories surrounding this place, and it was clear I hadn't adequately prepared for finding the ideal camping location, especially in an area like a swamp. I was obviously ill-prepared for the challenge this place presented. But now that I was here, I had 2 choices. Turn back and forget about this adventure, or prove to myself that even in unfavorable situations, I could persevere. Having come this far, I was determined not to give up. What might seem like a trivial task to many was for me a monumental step, one I took great pride in. Despite my lack of preparation, I was ready to face whatever the swamp had in store for me. This was more than just an adventure, it was a personal triumph over my anxieties and fears. Even now, as I recount this story and reflect on everything that happened that night, despite the trauma it caused, I don't regret a single moment. In fact, I believe it was a pivotal moment in my life. But let's get back to the story. At this point, I had finished dinner and taken a leisurely stroll around the tent area. It wasn't much, but it was enough to put me at ease. I climbed into my tent, the sounds of the night settling around me. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard something that jolted me awake. A rustling noise outside my tent. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The sound grew louder, and then I heard a voice. "Help me, please." Before I could react, the zipper of my tent was yanked open, and a woman stumbled inside. She was in a terrible state, dirty, bruised, and clearly terrified. She collapsed inside, panting heavily, and motioned for me to stay quiet. Panic surged through me as I tried to comprehend what was happening. She gestured toward the swamp, her eyes pleading. It was clear she was on the run from something, or someone. I quickly reached for my phone and tried to call 911. The signal was weak, but after several attempts I managed to get through. I explained the situation in hushed tones, my voice shaking. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but given the remote location, it would take some time. I had just put down the phone and was about to talk to the women when I realized we were not alone. Someone else was there with us, outside the tent. The man moved around the campsite, his footsteps circling the tent. At one point, he even reached out and touched the tent, his fingers brushing against the fabric. I could feel the woman tense beside me, and I silently prayed that he would move on. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps finally started to recede. The man cursed under his breath and moved away from the campsite. We waited, barely daring to breathe, until we were sure he was gone. I turned the flashlight back on and checked outside. There was no sign of him. Relieved, I turned back to the woman. "We need to stay here until the police arrive. It's not safe to move." She nodded, still shaking. We sat in silence, listening for any sound that might indicate the man's return. Time dragged on, but eventually, we heard the distant wail of sirens and relief washed over us as the sound grew closer. When the police finally arrived, I ran out to meet them, explaining everything as quickly as I could. They took the woman into their care, and she later led them back to where she had escaped from. From that moment on, there was nothing more I could do, except try to bury deep in my mind the image of that woman's eyes, and the moments of terror I experienced when the man was at the campsite. Even today, I am absolutely certain he knew she was there. She probably left footprints. Why he decided to leave, I don't know. But it was likely due to the possibility that someone might be with her who could confront him, and his fear of getting caught. I haven't had any further contact with the woman, except for the times I had to give statements to the police. As I tried to stay away from the situation, I'm not entirely sure about this, but I believe the man still hasn't been caught. Needless to say, I won't be camping alone anytime soon, especially not in such areas. I had always loved camping. The idea of getting away from the city, even for just a weekend, was something I looked forward to. The quiet, the peace, the escape from the noise and stress. These were what I needed. When I was a kid, my parents often took me camping, and I developed a love for it early on. Whenever I had the chance or felt the city was getting too claustrophobic, I'd grab my tent and backpack and head out to a more secluded spot. This time, I decided to go solo camping in a remote part of the Chuckswan State Forest I had never explored before. It was supposed to be a simple adventure, a way to clear my head. I had no idea it would turn into a nightmare. I reached the forest edge just after noon. The sun was high, and the sky was clear. A perfect day for camping. I parked my car, grabbed my backpack, and set off into the woods. The trail was narrow and overgrown, adding a sense of isolation. I walked for about an hour, feeling the tension of everyday life fade with each step. Finally, I found a small clearing near a stream and set up camp. I pitched my tent, gathered some firewood, and started a small fire. I spent the afternoon reading and listening to the forest. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and the stream's gentle flow provided a calming background. It was peaceful, just what I needed. As the sun began to set, I cooked a simple meal over the fire. The forest around me started to come alive with the sounds of night. It was a bit eerie, but also exciting. I was alone, miles from anyone, at the mercy of nature. This is, without a doubt, my favorite part of camping alone: the nighttime walks. I knew I had to be cautious of wildlife, but I was always prepared. I never kept food at the campsite. I always hung it several yards away in a tree to avoid attracting bears and other animals. I used bug spray and, above all, maintained a respectful awareness. My goal was never to disturb the habitat of those amazing creatures. And if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that animals respect you if you respect them. After dinner, I cleaned up and decided to explore the area a bit. With my flashlight in hand, I ventured a short distance from my campsite. The forest at night was a completely different world, with the trees casting long, ominous shadows. I was about to turn back when I heard a rustling sound coming from a dense thicket a few yards away. It sounded like an animal, yet at the same time, it seemed like something unnatural. I can't quite explain what I felt, but it was clearly discomforting. I froze, listening intently. The sound came again, this time louder and closer. I shone my flashlight towards the thicket, and for a moment, I saw something move. It was low to the ground, and from the brief glimpse I got, it looked like an animal. Feeling slightly uneasy, but not overly concerned, I decided it was best to head back to my campsite. As I walked back, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I kept turning around, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but I saw nothing. I chalked it up to my imagination and the inherent eeriness of being alone in the woods at night. Back at the campsite, I threw a few more logs onto the fire, made sure it was safe and wouldn't cause any wildfires, and settled into my tent. The sounds of the forest outside were a comforting reminder that I wasn't truly alone. Just as I was starting to drift off to sleep, I heard it again. The rustling sound, this time closer. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The sound grew louder, and I could now hear what sounded like footsteps. But they were slow, almost as if someone, or something, was deliberately trying to be quiet. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The fire was still slightly burning, casting flickering shadows around the campsite. That's when I saw it. Something was moving near the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the firelight. It was low to the ground, and from its movements, it looked like an animal, perhaps a bear. I knew I had to be careful. Bears could be dangerous, especially if they felt threatened. I lay there, straining to hear any sound. For a long time, there was nothing but the crackling of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. I knew I had taken every possible precaution. I had done everything my parents had taught me. Just as I was beginning to relax, thinking the animal had moved on, I heard a new sound. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and more distinct. Footsteps, but not the heavy, lumbering steps of a bear. These were lighter, more deliberate. Human footsteps. My blood ran cold. I was sure I had seen an animal earlier, something crawling low to the ground. But these were definitely human footsteps. My mind raced with possibilities. Was someone out there, watching me? Was it a coincidence, or had I somehow been followed? I wasn't going to stay there another second without knowing exactly what was going on outside the tent. I unzipped it, peeked out, and called out, asking who was there and what they wanted. I used the strongest, firmest voice I could. I wanted to make it clear that if anyone had bad intentions, they wouldn't be able to do anything without me putting up a fight. There was no one there, at least that I could see, and the noise I was hearing had stopped as well. An eerie silence fell over the campsite. I lay there, every muscle tensed, listening. Minutes passed, and the silence grew more oppressive. I began to think I had imagined it all, that perhaps the stress and isolation were playing tricks on my mind. Then, just as I was starting to drift off to sleep again, I heard a noise that made my heart stop. It was the sound of the tent zipper being slowly, carefully pulled open. I bolted upright, my flashlight in hand, and shone it towards the entrance of the tent. What I saw made my blood run cold. A face peering in through the small opening in the tent, pale and gaunt, with wide, unblinking eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. For a moment, I was frozen with terror. Then, instinct kicked in. I shouted, swinging the flashlight like a weapon. The figure recoiled, disappearing into the darkness. I scrambled out of the tent, my heart pounding in my chest. The fire had died down, casting long, menacing shadows around the campsite. I could hear rapid footsteps retreating into the woods. Whoever, or whatever, it was gone now. But the fear lingered, a cold knot in my stomach. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the fire, clutching the flashlight and a makeshift weapon, a heavy branch I had picked up. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every rustle, every creak of the forest sent my heart racing. The face in the tent haunted my thoughts, those wide, unblinking eyes staring at me from the darkness. My first instinct was that it was a man, but in reality, I'm not even sure. I was in a panic. It was dark, and I only saw his face, but the noises he made and the way he ran seemed like an animal. As soon as morning broke, casting its first light, I packed up everything and got out of there as fast as I could. A few months later, I came across a couple on a forum who had a remarkably similar experience to mine, just a few kilometers away from where I was. I still don't know what it was, but one thing's for sure. I won't be venturing back to that area alone again.